Hi everyone, my name's Stephanie Sanders and I'm happy to present on the article called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. The article was written in 1988 and I was wondering, why is it part of our curriculum now when we know so much more about white privilege today than we did 33 years ago? To put this in context, I wanted to learn more about the author, so I went to the oracle, namely Wikipedia, and this is what I learned. Peggy McIntosh was born in 1934, which makes her 54 years old at the time that she wrote this article. She received her PhD from Harvard and is a senior research scientist of the Wellesley Centers for Women. She also founded the National SEED Project for Inclusive Curriculum, which became the largest peer-led professional development project for educators in the United States, helping faculty to create curricula, teaching methods, and classroom climates that are multicultural, gender fair, and inclusive of all students regardless of their backgrounds. By the way, SEED stands for Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. It could fit our climate now, couldn't it? Anyway, with her background in mind, let's explore McIntosh's article, White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. The main purpose of the article is to bring awareness of privilege in our society with white male privilege as the starting point. The author says that in trying to bring materials from the Women's Studies department into the rest of the curriculum, quote, I've often noticed men's unwillingness to grant that they are overprivileged, even though they may grant that women are disadvantaged. They may say they will work to improve women's status in the society, the university, or the curriculum, but they can't or won't support the idea of lessening men's advantage. She says that in thinking through unacknowledged male privilege as a phenomenon, quote, I realize that since hierarchies in our society are interlocking, there was most likely a phenomenon of white privilege which was similarly denied and protected. As a white person, I realized I had been taught about racism as something which puts others at a disadvantage, but had not been taught or had been taught not to see one of its corollary aspects, white privilege, which puts me at an advantage. McIntosh makes an important connection here that in her experience, whites are carefully taught not to recognize white privilege just as males are taught not to recognize male privilege. So she began her investigation into asking herself, what is white privilege? She says, I have come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets, which I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. In other words, it's like having an unlimited Venmo account with next day Amazon delivery. The key question that the author is addressing is, just as women's studies look at white male privilege and ask men to relinquish some of their power, her new revelation about her own white privilege begs the question, what will I do to lessen or end it? The most important information in this article is McIntosh took a look at her own white privilege through the lens of skin color only, recognizing that class, religion, gender, ethnic status, and geographical location even is intertwined. But her African American co-workers and friends and acquaintances generally could not enjoy the following privileges. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. Think about this in terms of your own race color. does it apply? If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I would want to live. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can turn on the television or open the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. When I'm told about our national heritage or about, quote, civilization, unquote, I'm sure that people of my color made it what it is. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. Whether I use checks or credit cards or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial reliability. I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them. I can swear or dress in secondhand clothes or not answer letters without having people attribute these choices to the bad morals, the poverty, or the illiteracy of my race. I could speak in public to a powerful male group without putting my race on trial. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. I'm never asked to speak for all the people of my racial group. I can remain oblivious of the language and customs of persons of color who constitute the world's majority, by the way, without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion. It's a big one for me. I can go home from most meetings of organizations I belong to feeling somewhat tied in, rather than isolated, out of place, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, or worse yet, feared. I can be sure that if I need legal or medical help, my race will not work against me. The main inferences or conclusions in this article are that McIntosh says that in facing white privilege, quote, I must give up the myth of meritocracy. If these things are true that I just enumerated, this is not such a free country. One's life is not what one makes it. Many doors open for certain people through no virtues of their own. The key concepts we need to understand in this article are that there is a hierarchy of privilege in our society and that the privilege is likely to be invisible to the ones at higher levels. By these concepts, the author means unless you see privilege from a disadvantaged point, as the author did, you run the risk of being oblivious to it. The main assumptions underlying the author's thinking are that this invisibility is built into the system. We were not meant to see the structure of oppression lest we be called on to deconstruct it. And if we take this line of reasoning seriously, the implications are that obliviousness about white advantage, like obliviousness about male advantage, is kept strongly inculcated in the United States so as to maintain the myth of meritocracy, the myth that democratic choice is equally available to all. I'm going to insert a personal observation here because this week I heard a white woman with a large platform on television say that she is proud that we live in a meritocracy, and I wondered, meritocracy for whom? This is someone who is supposed to be more woke, and yet her obliviousness was staggering to me. This just proves the point the author made earlier, that we are not meant to see our own privilege. And if we fail to take this line of reasoning seriously, the implications are, well, one assumption that I questioned about this is that people of color want to be more like white people. Now, of course, everyone wants to be afforded the same privileges that the author enumerated. However, there is an assumption by white people that people of color want to be like us. That to me is a very arrogant assumption, and one that in itself shows the oppressive nature of white supremacy. A colleague of McIntosh's says that, quote, whites are taught to think of their lives as morally neutral, normative and average, and also ideal, so that when we work to benefit others, we being whites, this is seen as work which will allow them to be more like us, unquote, as if us is the gold standard of achievement. The main point of view presented in this article is that as an educated white woman who wants to further the women's studies department in her university, that's her viewpoint, her realization of the hierarchy of oppression in our society led her to question her own privilege and, most important, quote, though systemic change takes many decades, if we raise our daily consciousness on the benefits of being light-skinned, what will we do with that awareness? As we know from watching men, it's an open question whether we will choose to use unearned advantage to weaken hidden systems of advantage, and whether we will use that power to try to reconstruct power systems on a broader base. So to conclude, I'd like to circle back to the original question, why are we reading an article that's 33 years old? What's its relevance today? Well, it's very pertinent today. She ended the article saying that it takes many decades for social change, and that's obvious. So let me offer you an example from this week. Sally Jenkins, a columnist for the Washington Post, writes about the disparity between men's and women's basketball during March Madness in the NCAA. She writes, I'm tired. Not from today or from yesterday, but from 40 years of it. 40 years tired of writing the same damn story about the same NCAA shortchangers in suits who would begrudge women's athletes so much as an equal amount of the air and attire if they thought it might come at a man's expense. Beautifully put, Sally Jenkins. So I'll leave you with question. According to McIntosh, whites were taught not to recognize white privilege, and as a white woman swimming in it, I was and am still blind to many ways in which privilege has accommodated me and others like me. The conversation around this topic is fairly recent herstory. What do you suggest can be done to educate white people and others to be better allies for one another moving forward? Thank you for listening and considering that question.